we talk to a lot of you guys now because we've been making these offers. Let's talk about your HR, and we start supporting the offices. We've gone into more than one where everybody on the team was being paid by salary, which is okay, but they weren't the front desk person, the administrative person, was being paid very well on a salary. However, they were working overtime. They were working more than 40 hours, probably 10 or 15 times a year, and they weren't being paid overtime. And so that is not legal. You can pay someone a fixed salary, but as soon as they work more than 40 hours, you have to do some math, and then you got to start paying them overtime.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that because it's not that you can't pay them a salary; it's that you have to pay them overtime.
Welcome to the American Med Spa Association podcast, Medical Spa Insider. This week, AmSpa founder Alex Thiersch is speaking with Paul Edwards, founder and CEO of CEDR HR Solutions.
Hi, everybody. This is Alex Thiersch. Welcome to Medical Spa Insider, the podcast put on by the American Med Spa Association. It is, I was going to say it's April. It's actually May. We are about a month out from the Medical Spa show, so we're all recovering from that. And we have on the AmSpa hotline, Paul Edwards from CEDR HR Solutions, CEDR HR. Did I pronounce it CEDR, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, okay, you got it right.
Gotcha. And Paul is kind of our go-to HR guru. Whenever things come up about changing in the world of HR, changing in the world, with the rules and regs that deal with handling employees, whatever that is, we like to get Paul on. And I'll tell you, Paul, your spidey sense must be tingling because this was a huge couple months for you in the world of HR. I would imagine the number of things that have kind of come down with respect to independent contractors, the overtime rules, and then the non-competes obviously is something we're all dealing with. Did you guys must have had like a party or something? Like
we did. We had a big HR nerd party, and it was coordinated across the country, and we all did it at the same time. It was a huge Zoom meeting, and in HR, there's really not a lot of emergencies. I know a lot of people feel like every HR issue is an emergency, but this constitutes an actual kind of red alert. Bells went off, and we're all walking around feeling like we're pretty important right now because we've got some information.
You are your phone must be ringing. People are like, "What the hell is going on?" I mean, that's. First of all, a lot of this was a surprise to me. I used to, back in a formal life, I did employment law. So, but anyway, so as an employment lawyer, I've looked at these things, and when these things popped up, I was, my eyebrows were raised. I did immediately think of you and the HR brethren of the world, thinking like, man, you guys all must be in a bit of a tizzy. Let's kind of get into it. First of all, I'm curious from a timing perspective. You said, this was, an emergency, which I think is appropriate when you're thinking about the impact that these things have. Was all of this a surprise? And there's been three specific things that have kind of come out that we'll talk about. I'm speaking more about the Department of Labor rule, which deals with overtime, as well as the non-compete rule, which is kind of the one that's put shockwaves through our industry. Did you know this was all coming? How did you handle it?
Well, we all saw the FTC ruling coming because they put it out for public comment, and we were just kind of watching it. We predicted that the day before we did a podcast. Jenny, who's on my compliance team, by the way, everybody, if I seem smart, it's not me. There's a whole team of people behind me that correct me and keep me informed and keep me updated. So I want to recognize, the compliance people and the attorneys and stuff that work here at CEDR that help keep us all in line. So the FTC thing we saw coming, that was a slow moving bus. It is it's kind of for lack of a better word, it's kind of outrageous in some ways. As they're talking about non-competes, they have basically telegraphed that they were going to outlaw them. We'll just use that generalization, Alex. There are some minimal ways that you can use them still, but for the most part, they've said we're getting rid of them. We predicted during the podcast the day before that at least 2 lawsuits would occur immediately, probably both in Texas, and that's exactly what occurred. Well, I'm not sure if the Chamber of Commerce shopped for a Texas judge, but the other business was in Texas that challenged this, and both of them I'm not sure. I know that the business that challenged it, Alex, I think they have standing, and I think they're really gonna be able to fight this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so not too big of a surprise, but they published the rule, and now we had a countdown of 180 days, and then it just goes into effect.
Yeah.
I'll just expand on this since we just started with it.
Yeah.
What we think is going to happen is that the court is going to have to issue some kind of injunction against it going into effect, because it is such a far-reaching rule that, for everybody listening, it's hard to repack something back in the genie bottle once you let it out.
Right.
So they're probably, could you imagine that they let the rule go into effect, all these non-competes become invalid, and then 8 months later or 5 years later, a court finds that the FTC was overreaching, which is the argument that's going to be made here.
Yeah.
And that the non-competes are in effect. So now you've had, it would just
imagine
be
the chaos.
Yeah, it would be chaos. So, I believe that we're going to see some kind of injunctive relief, and it's going to sit still. We're telling all of our members, just don't worry about this right now. It's still several months out, and we're pretty sure that we're going to see it delayed.
Yeah. I agree. I've had several conversations. I don't think there aren't many lawyers that I've talked to, particularly given the venue, because filing these claims in the great state of Texas, where, nothing against Texas, but the venue, there's a venue there that a lot of folks choose because it has a slant towards getting these injunctions put on.
Right.
I think the standing question is a good issue, but I agree. I would be very surprised to not see some sort of a nationwide injunction implemented relatively quickly. I just don't think they're going to let it hang, because it is going to cause people some consternation. And my next question was kind of, you had teased it already, is you mentioned you're telling your clients that not to worry about it. That is, I think, prudent. What happens though as some time passes and we start inching up towards the 180-day rule? The whole not worrying about it thing gets a little more tricky.
It does get a little more tricky. The great thing about this, and I'm chuckling a little bit as I say this because you asked me that question that way, is that they have done such a thorough job of killing all non-competes that it's pretty simple for us to say, well, look, if this goes into effect and and the court lets it roll forward, then your non-compete is no longer going to work for you. And so that is kind of the stand that we're taking on it right now. I just think that I'm not I don't know everything about how government works. I don't understand how the Federal Trade Commission is able to issue this kind of sweeping rule or set of rules or standards. I just don't. And it really, opinion. Okay, opinion, everybody.
Sure.
Just personal opinion. Business to business owner, right? I understand that a lot of companies misuse non-competes in ways that they shouldn't be using it. And that's what the FTC is trying to make their primary purpose for making these changes.
Absolutely.
I mean, you stop a mattress salesman from working at another mattress store. It's like, really, is that where this should be applied?
And the big example here was Jimmy John's sandwich shop, right? They were restricting Jimmy John's, which was ridiculous too.
It seems like that seems like a bit of an overreach. And then this from state to state, as the years have gone by, especially the last decade, non-competes and other components of non-competes, some things that accompany them, like NDAs and non-solicitations, have begun to fall out of favor with the courts. And they're very much, they're saying, look, we can't rewrite our laws here, but as judges, as a judiciary, we're saying that if you don't have a really, really demonstrable reason for placing this non-compete on an employee, we are not going to hold it up. And I think that that's fair. I think that's reasonable. And then other states like California, Alex, as you know, you can violate someone's civil liberties by putting in a non-compete. So they took it all the way to, it's a crime. Yeah. So there's always been a lot to take into account here. And there are unfortunately a lot of non-competes that are derivatives of, I know a guy who also owns a medical spa, and she or he put one in with their employees and they gave it to me, and I'm going to put it in with my employees. And even though you're both medical spas, your circumstances may still be different, and their non-compete might work there but wouldn't work for you. So it's always been a complicated thing. It's been a very, very complicated thing. So
yeah, it is. I've I go both ways on it, because I certainly think there are some instances where it's necessary, and it's a little bit, to me, I kind of agree. I don't quite understand how the FTC can limit that, in all circumstances. I think that's a very that's a tough road to cross. So, but at the same time, I have seen, and I've been involved in litigation back in my litigator days, where there were some really obnoxious things that were done with non-competes, and they can be very oppressive. That said, I think this is all going to get sorted out in the courts relatively quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on this, because I know there's other pressing matters that are going to be going into effect. I mean, do you have any last words on the non-compete issue?
Just sit by, everybody. Don't get too freaked out. We're still months away from understanding, how this is going to play out. I really don't think that it's going to go into effect the way that it was written, and this could take years to
well, and just to kind of put a pin in it, like you said, I mean, the way that the rule was drafted is so broad, I don't see how they can't strike it down. And it almost seems like they're trying to just start a fight so they can try to figure out a way to settle it later on and get
They have flung everything at the wall, and most of it's going to slide down, and they're hoping some of it sticks. And that's just what could happen. That may happen. Yeah.
So there were kind of three big things that we wanted to talk about. That was one. And again, I think that's prudent advice. Everyone should just kind of sit back and wait a bit and see how that starts to filter out. The other two, though, one deals with independent contractors, I believe, and the other is the overtime rule, which is going to have, I think, a major impact on folks very, very pretty quickly. Dealer's choice. Go ahead and pick which one you want to talk about first.
Let's go with the simple one. The one that I don't think is going to be challenged, I believe is going to move forward, which is the we talk about the overtime rule, which is it's really, I mean, that's the way it's been couched, but what it really is that let's just put it in terms for all the medical spas listening. If you have an office manager who's being paid on a fixed salary, on an exempt basis, who qualifies to be an exempt employee, probably because he or she spends more than half of their time supervising other people, not doing the work of those other people, probably because they're supervising, did I say 2 or more people? So that's the other one. And then there's a bunch of other criteria that run down that list to make someone fall underneath what we commonly refer to as the white collar exemption for paying someone a fixed salary. And just, that rule says that once you pay that person a fixed salary of a certain base salary amount, so there was always a floor to this, and we'll talk about that floor next. As long as you pay them that, you can work them 40 hours, 50 hours, or 120 hours in a week if they're willing to do it. Now, of course, we shouldn't be doing that, but that's just the rule. And then you have the people who are non-exempt, and that's everybody else that needs to be paid hourly. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. I'm going to say this to everybody who's listening. A lot of you out there have gotten that part wrong. You are paying people a fixed salary who don't qualify for that fixed salary because on the basis of the work that they do. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Well, and then just before you move on, I mean, the other issue is, not necessarily just also in addition to salary versus hourly, it's, then you get that 40-hour rule where you have to pay them overtime, right? Once they go over that rule. And that's where it can get very tricky. If you've got somebody and you do work them 100 hours and you got to pay them overtime, that becomes
if you misclassify them and they're working, consistently 42 hours, 50 hours, 45 hours, every single one of those weeks they were owed overtime. But since you've misclassified them as a salaried employee, not understanding that just paying them a fixed amount isn't enough. And by the way, everybody, I guess we'll go down the rabbit hole a little bit, Alex. Just because they work 36 hours one week and 44 hours the next week doesn't mean you don't owe them overtime. That's not how it doesn't wash across 2 weeks. It's every week. How many hours do they work? And we're leaving out California, which is 8 hours a day, and some other states that have daily overtime. requirements.
Well, and so you mentioned that folks were kind of getting the basic rule wrong. I'd love to kind of get into that a little bit. What did you mean by that?
Well, they classify, for instance, they'll classify, you can pay, for instance, you can pay an RN a fixed salary. They can meet that white collar exemption. You can pay them a fixed salary. But a nurse who is not an RN, who falls below that level, it's very normal for people to think you can pay them as an exempt employee, and they don't qualify for it. They don't meet the Department of Labor's standards for qualifying as a salaried employee who doesn't get paid overtime.
Right.
I have, we talk to a lot of you guys now because we've been making these offers. Let's talk about your HR, and we start supporting the offices. We've gone into more than one where everybody on the team was being paid by salary, which is okay, but they weren't the front desk person, the administrative person, was being paid very well on a salary. However, they were working overtime. They were working more than 40 hours, probably 10 or 15 times a year, and they weren't being paid overtime. And so that is not legal. You can pay someone a fixed salary, but as soon as they work more than 40 hours, you have to do some math, and then you got to start paying them overtime.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask that, because it's not that you can't pay them a salary. It's that you have to pay them overtime.
Yeah,
if
there's
they are not exempt.
Yep, there's an exempt employee who's paid a salary, and there's a non-exempt employee who's paid a salary. Most of the time, that second model is to make things easier, and it's only really safe as long as they don't work any overtime, and then you still have to track their hours. So it's all of that stuff comes into play.
Right.
So look, the main thing is that for years the base pay for being paying someone exempt was very, very low, very low, and it wasn't being adjusted for decades. And so we were looking at a base salary for an exempt employee of something around I think it was like $35,500. Hang on. I think it's $35,588 is the current base level that you have to pay the minimum amount. Now, I think everybody who's listening out there is kind of saying, well, I'm an office manager. I make a whole lot more than that. This does not impact me. And I agree. And in this first iteration coming up here quite shortly, I believe it's in the beginning of July, they're going to take this up to an annualized amount of $43,000. It's slightly more than $43,000. I don't think that's going to impact a lot of your workers out there who are properly exempt employees. But at the beginning of next year, this is going to go up to $58,000. And then it's scheduled to every year, or maybe it's every 3 years, can't recall. The Department of Labor is going to look at it again. They're going to look at the cost of living, and they're going to begin to raise it up. And I think they already have 63 or 64,000 in their sights that they know that they're going to go. That's going to be the next one to go there. When we get to 58, that's going to impact some of the the spas and the medical practices that we see out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And the other thing that I was, and this not necessarily a new thing, but I think there definitely appears there's going to be a lot more emphasis on enforcement of this, is it's not just the number, right? It's what they're doing. And that is the thing to me that folks have, not that there's been a whole lot of enforcement in this, but when there is, it tends to be because they're misclassified. They're not being paid enough. And more importantly, or they're classified correctly and they're just not paying them overtime.
Right.
And so I'll let you kind of take it in the order that you want. I mean, let's go through the rule and or what are the most important parts that people need to know about right now. And then I think you mentioned some of the deadlines that are coming up. Are there some exemptions and things like that people need to think about?
Okay, so that's a good question. This applies to everybody who's listening. So I don't care if you have just a couple of 3 or 4 employees. And by the way, if you are only 2 or 3, only have 2 or 3 employees, and you've classified one of your, we'll say, administrative people, you've made them the de facto office manager, the chances that you can classify them as an exempt employee are very, very low. That you're too small, you don't have enough employees that they have direct control over. you really are running yourself at a big risk at paying that office manager. That I'm air quoting everybody who's listening. That office manager as an exempt employee. So really, what you need to do is you've got to have a worker who can make hiring decisions, who, as I said before, spends more than half of their time supervising what other people are doing. So one of the triggers here is that, like maybe you go to something like and I'm not saying specifically about them, but I think everybody will get this, a dollar store where someone's made a manager, but they work the cash register, they stock, they do everything that the rank and file employees do. That does not make them a manager. In fact, it disqualifies them as being able to be labeled as a manager. So again, they're spending time managing other people. They're paid the proper base salary that we just discussed. Again, they have some say in hiring and firing, generally and not always, but they can spend a little money independently. They can run ads for jobs. They interview people. Again, all of these things that we recognize that managers are supposed to do. Perhaps they administer HR. They issue corrective actions or just coaching, and they're involved in those sorts of things. So I think everybody who's listening can begin to get a picture of what that kind of white collar worker does. And so those are really the rules there. So, Alex, I used that earlier example. If you have 3 employees, and you are, let's say you own the medical spa. So I'm going to make the person who owns it an NP. So we have a nurse practitioner who in her state or his state can own a medical spa and run it. You have an office manager who you call an office manager. You have one other person who works for that office manager, and his or her role is maybe everything. They fill in, they answer phones mostly, they deal with patients, they schedule. They may help you submit to insurance if that's applicable. I know that's not often applicable, but they're doing those kind of administrative jobs. Then you've got a third or a fourth employee that is on the clinical team. They mostly work in the back. They're mostly some kind of clinician. Maybe they're an injection specialist or they're something like that. So that office manager is not spending 50% of their time supervising that clinical person, because the clinical person operates underneath the NP, and those two are in the back working all the time. So now really all you have is one other employee other than the office manager. And so they're just disqualified as an exempt employee. You should be tracking their hours, paying them by the hour. And if they work overtime, you're paying them overtime. So I just examples help. Yeah, that's it.
So I want to make sure that folks kind of get the 30,000 foot view here. So if, unless the employee is is what's deemed to be like a white collar worker, which really means that they're a manager, they're a supervisor, they're involved in business decisions, they're doing those kinds of things. Unless they are a white collar worker, air quotes, making a certain minimum salary, they have to be paid overtime when they work more than 40 hours a week.
That is correct. There's no exception to that rule across the entire country, including California. And then California breaks that down into 8-hour days. So if they work overtime on a daily basis, and there's some other rules there in California, but
so I want to put you on the spot here a little bit,
sure,
because I'm curious. Our industry, the med spa industry, I think is going to struggle with this a little bit because just the way the dynamic works and you mentioned RNs, I think it's a great example. If you have an RN who, by his or her very nature and definition is supervised by somebody, right? So a doctor or, in some cases an NP or a PA. Some of these RNs though are, killing it. They're making 6 figures plus, right? Sometimes, multiples of that because of the amount of business that they're doing. But they are by definition RNs, and therefore they are, delegated work to. And to me, that presents a real problem for how they are going to be deemed to be exempt, because on some level they're by definition they're not exempt, and so they're going to have to be paid overtime in addition to everything else that's being paid. I'm oversimplifying it, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you brought up something very interesting. So, for the most part, if you look at the rules out there and you look at the Department of Labor, and I think RN's a really good one to use.
Yeah.
For the most part, everyone's going to say, "Look, it's okay to make your RN a exempt employee.
Right.
It's okay to pay them a fixed salary. It's okay to do that." However, as you know from working in employment law, what they do matters. So what they're really saying is if you bring an RN in and the RN does the work that an RN does, which includes some independent judgment, some ability to, some RNs can even prescribe. I mean, there are they have to meet the underlying criteria.
Right.
Let's do an exaggeration. You hire an RN who we all have said is pretty much an exempt employee, but you put them on the phones, which I know you would never do, but I'm just using an example. You put them on the phones, they are not doing the work that qualifies them to be an exempt employee.
Right.
Just like if we take an attorney who has a law degree and we put them in the marketing department writing, editing and writing and not researching and not, being a lawyer, we're messing with our ability to classify them as an exempt salary employee.
Right. And I think, you're right. I kind of buried the lead on that, is that there are exemptions for certain types of work, right, within the statute. So, and legal medical services, certain services can be deemed exempt. So that's where an RN doing medical services, I think wouldn't necessarily be a problem. So before all of you go drive off the road and start paying. Sure.
No, I think that's good clarification. Yeah.
But I'm curious because I know, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Do you all have some resources that folks can look at to kind of get some additional context information on the overtime rule?
Well, look, I think the best way to get education from us is go to our website. So that's cedrsolutions.com. And because we love AmSpa and we think you guys still love us, go to our website and put a / in that and just add AmSpa to the end of it. And it'll put you on a landing page where there's two buttons. One of them is like, hey, buy from us, let's talk. The other one is get free stuff. And what that is education. Everybody should just come in and get the education because we are talking about this stuff nonstop. And once you're in the education loop, you're going to get other really useful stuff. You get the ability to directly ask us questions. One of the things I was going to tell everybody is pick somebody to keep you updated on these subjects right now. And we can be that somebody if that's what you guys want. If you come and put your email in, I promise you're not going to suffer for it. It's just education, lots of good stuff that you can use.
No, and you do. That bears repeating because you do have a lot of really good information. And right now, let's be honest, this is a time when folks need it with these rules coming out. So with the overtime rules, we've got unless you're exempt. And the salary requirements have been raised. The exemptions have been kind of further defined and tweaked a little bit. Obviously, there's some exemptions for medical. I think there's going to be issues with supervision when it comes to what a medical director is doing, for instance, things like that. Anything else in that rule that bears discussing before we move on?
No, Alex, I think it's pretty uneventful. They've raised the base salary, and you and I went off on a tangent saying, aside from all of these base salary, the base amount that they have to be paid, there's a lot of room for error out there. And like I said, we find you guys making these errors quite a bit. And it's not just you. We could go into car dealers. We can go into dental offices. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of misunderstanding around this stuff. And, the reason why they care, the government cares, is because just about everything that we're talking about today impacts things like taxes. When we're going to talk about independent contractors, the state and the feds miss out on taxes, and so that's kind of what this is coming to. Right.
Well, and talk about kind of misunderstanding, misclassification. Let's talk about independent contractors versus employees because that is a massive area where people, I think, really get it wrong almost more often than they get it right. And it's something that we deal with a lot. Not to say you can't be an independent contractor. Of course you can. There's rules. But I think people don't really understand how that works. And I'm curious, number one, why is this relevant right now? Why are we talking about it? And what are your thoughts?
Well, they just issued a new rule. It went into effect. No, I should rephrase that. because the FTC issued a new set of rules and a bunch of new guidelines. The Department of Labor came out and said, look, we had something occur during the last administration which did not comport with employment law, with common law, and it just departed so hard off out into the right-hand side that it completely misled employers about how they could classify people. So they wanted to come back and clarify that. So Alex, there's the DOL test. Everybody, the test is just a bunch of criteria, just one thing after another. There's a bunch of DOL, a bunch of tests within the DOL, and then the IRS has their tests too, because they care. And the two cross over in a lot of ways. All right, so it's hard to not mingle the two together, but I'm going to try and separate the IRS out because I am not an accountant, nor am I an expert in that area. On the DOL side, that criteria that has always been there, they decided that they were going to bubble up one of the things on the list and make it more important. So look, as a company for the last 18 years, we have always taken this factor that they've just brought up and made a dominant factor. We've always taken it into account. It's always been there, but it was given lesser attention. And so that factor is the degree to which the work that the worker performs is integral to your business. That I know. So just let that set it. Yeah. What does that mean? So, if you are a medical spa and you do part of your services are injections, and which is probably going to happen. If you bring an injection specialist in, they are your employee because the work they are doing is integral to your business, to your practice. And therefore cannot be under the law, under the rules, they cannot be designated as an independent contractor. Does that make sense?
Yes, except when you start, unpacking what integral means, right? Like what does that mean? I mean, I can see if you have an injectables practice, then that's obviously integral. If you have a med spa and, that's a big part of it, or even if it's a small part of it, it's still integral.
Small part, that last part, Alex, even if it's a small part, a regular part, it is what you do. It is part of what you do.
Yeah.
That's part of your business.
I mean, for me, so first of all, there are a lot of RNs, a lot of RN injectors out there that are independent contractors.
No, they're not.
Well, that's true. You're absolutely. And there's a whole nother reason that I've been kind of talking to folks about, and is that, the integral part is certainly one part of it. The other part is, who's controlling the work, right? And that's not maybe as big anymore, but RNs are delegated to, they are supervised. So in some ways it's difficult for them to be independent contractors. But I mean, so let's, assuming the integral part, since you talked about that, if there's an RN out there right now who is an independent contractor, what should they do?
It's not them that I'm addressing because they're not in any trouble for trying to be an independent contractor and being paid that way. It is the practices or the practice which is paying them as an independent contractor who is the one who's going to be getting themselves in trouble if it's found that this person is ultimately not truly an independent contractor under this set of tests and rules. And clearly, the Department of Labor at the federal level is saying, look, you guys stop doing this. This is stop making people who are workers be independent contractors or letting them choose to be that or designate them that way when it is your responsibility to designate them properly. So I wasn't as clear as I'd like for it to be, Alex. Let me say it a different way. The ultimate responsibility of the classification as to whether they're a worker or an independent contractor falls on the entity that does the hiring, that pays the worker.
Right.
It doesn't matter if a temp agency sent them. It doesn't matter if they come to you and say, I work at 4 other places and I've talked to my accountant and my accountant says I can be an independent contractor. Neither they nor that accountant nor a temp agency can, for lack of a better word, exonerate you of this responsibility that you are the one who are supposed to classify that employee properly. Yeah. And
And nor can you put it in their contract that says you're an independent contractor if they're not.
And they can't indemnify you through an agreement. So even if they are like, I'll take on the responsibility. If we're wrong here, I won't pay you. I won't pay. You won't pay the penalties. I'll pay. That doesn't matter. The DOL will not even give it a second thought. They won't look at it because it doesn't matter. Because the responsibility is on the practice. Now, Alex, there are like 6 main things. The test is very long. Okay. And everybody should know that you could check off everything on the test and leave one thing that you can't check off as a yes that would make them an independent contractor. And that one thing could carry more weight than the other 45 things on the list. So it's kind of tricky.
It is tricky.
It's kind of tricky, but it's not. I really think people should default to the worker as an employee, and I won't get into it, but I have a lot of other reasons I like this, which is about control, is about maintaining standards, and some other things. So 6 main things: the opportunity for profit and loss depending upon that person's managerial skills. And so when someone is working for you and we're just going to pick on injection specialists. I'm just going to use them. When they're paid, whether or not there's a patient there or not, that means that they do not experience a profit and loss. When they do not participate in the advertising in order to put the patients or the customers in front of them, they have no money invested in this. And it doesn't take long for most workers to just absolutely fail that part of the test. Next part of the test is investments by the worker and the potential employer. So again, it goes back to the first part. What did the worker pay for some of the Google ads that went out? Did they participate in some way in getting the patients in there other than they're getting referrals? Again, that doesn't really count. So that's another part of the test. The degree of the permanency of the relationship. That's a big one. So people tend to hire an RN or an associate doctor or someone along these lines, and that person's been working there for 5 or 6 years, or even for more than a year. It doesn't have to be that long term. That indicates there's a permanency to the relationship and that they're there all the time. Now, let's say that there is some kind of practice up in. Let's go out in left field. Let's say that we're in Wyoming and we have a dental practice. This guy or gal is sitting out in the middle of nowhere. He's very successful. He's got 14 employees. He sees patients within 300 miles. He's got a landing strip behind his office. By the way, I have this guy as a client. He has a landing strip because that's how you get around Wyoming and Montana and places like that sometimes. And let's say that he has determined that some of the jaw issues that are going on require a specialist to come in, someone like an injection specialist. On occasion, he's got a few patients and he has them come in and he has them inject Botox or whatever else that needs to be done to help this person with their tendonitis or their jaw or whatever is going on. That person is an independent contractor. Right. That person is coming in. If there's no one there to inject, that person doesn't come. If that person shows up to inject and the patient doesn't show up, then that means they experience a loss because they are not going to get any income because their relationship is based on that. So I just kind of wanted to give that kind of take you out in left field and show you how someone could be an independent contractor.
Well, it really is. I mean, it's correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's meant to categorize people who truly are temporary and independent, right?
Yeah,
so they're independent.
Yep. Or we remember we said about the test. So let's just talk about, they may be permanent. In other words, they're the one who always comes there. So you're like, and independent contractor, but then all these other factors come into place. So the permanency does not make them not an independent contractor. It's all the other factors that come in. And hopefully everybody's still awake out there because we have just a couple more. Alex and I could talk about this. Alex and I were like, yeah, really?
No, let's do it. I mean, we're going to go on for hours.
The nature and degree of control, again, just saying I leave them alone and let them do what they want to do. Hygienists and dental practices have tried this argument.
Mhm.
And if you look at the laws that govern how they can treat and who has to be there, a hygienist cannot do hygiene independent of being supervised by a doctor, even if the doctor never goes in there.
Yeah, and that's where RNs fall. It's
Yep.
slightly different. It's slightly different. So I think there's the potential to have some wiggle room there. But I think that's what I've always thought, is that RNs need some sort of supervision, even if it's not direct over the shoulder. There
Right,
is
right.
some supervision.
Somebody has to be responsible, for the outcomes
Right.
and for the treatment standards and et cetera.
Right.
And then we talked about to the extent which the work performed is an integral part of the business. So that's new. They bubbled that up. So we took you guys on a very, very long trip to say to you, this is something that was down the list that needed to be considered, which should have always been on the main list. And so in the beginning of March, they moved it up and said, guys, you really need to give this all the weight that you can possibly give it, because it is one of the key determining factors. And then the last one was skill and initiative, which a lot of the people that we're talking to today that are misclassified, they can demonstrate skill and initiative under the terms that the DOL kind of looks at it. So number five.
Well, now hang on. When you say skill and initiative, like what do you mean? In which way? If the worker has
Well,
it,
we would say that a nurse an RN can demonstrate skill and initiative. She or he has been trained in a certain way, and if they determine, if it is their initiative that a patient needs a certain course of treatment, they can initiate that treatment, although they may have to go to a doctor and say, hey, I'd like to push this. I'd like to stop administering that. I think you should take a look at this. That's the initiative that they can demonstrate, which again makes some RNs easily exempt employees, but again, on a case-by-case basis, based on typically what you're doing over the course of time working for an employer.
Okay. Makes sense.
So this is that's the main part of it. I mean, I could go down the list and name all the other things. Our message to our members is if you have independent contractor employees, you need to take a look at this, and they can take a look at it now, because the Department of Labor is not going to be forgiving once you catch an audit.
Yeah. And do you, I know you mentioned that as part of your service and your service to our members, you have you provide a lot of free information. Is this for folks that are clients of yours? Do you help them make these determinations and kind of walk through the steps?
We do. We give them all the information they could possibly need. We break it down, and this is what we do throughout our processes with everybody. And this is one of the things that I'd like for the office managers who are listening out there, and even the owners who are listening out there. In order for us to be great partners with you long term, and for you to feel good about paying the little amount that you pay to be a member, to have access to our experts and stuff, in order for that to be supportable by us, we need our clients and our members to get smarter and more educated, so that they're making good decisions. And so we're having to clean up fewer messes, or they're having to clean up fewer messes. So this is absolutely something that we work through. Now, who could counter us this? Who might push back on us on this? Accountants sometimes will push back, but CPAs will not. The CPAs are aligned with what we're saying here. A lawyer who may not be as well-versed as they should be in this area may push back and say, no, I don't agree. This is the argument I would make, et cetera, et cetera. We always defer to your CPA, to your attorney, but we also say you should get them to just shoot you an email telling you why they've made this decision and what makes it so that they feel that it is a defendable decision. And in some cases, they may be able to make that case. There could be a circumstantial issue going on that they can bring to light that would make putting someone, designating someone as an IC okay. But for the most part, those are the pushback. That's the kind of pushback that we get. And so we just provide all the information. And I haven't seen anybody not make the right decision once they have everything in front of them. And we just work hard to boil it down in plain speak.
Yeah, which is crucial, right? Because that's difficult. That's difficult. And lawyers tend to do a really bad, and accountants tend to do a bad job at boiling it down to regular language.
Well, and accountants aren't CPAs, everybody. So there's nothing wrong with accountants, but they don't have the same degree of responsibility to this subject. A CPA can lose their license and their ability to practice as a CPA by giving out the wrong information here. And then they're concerned about what the IRS says as well, which kind of mirrors what the DOL is saying.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I would add, you mentioned that you're not an IRS expert, neither am I. But I will say that the penalties that the IRS can put on you if you misclassify can be substantial and debilitating, because you have to go back and pay all the taxes from way back when, plus penalties, plus interest,
matching their FICA and all that stuff that you didn't do.
Stuff. And it can be it can be business altering. So you need to hire an attorney who specializes in this area, who knows how to deal with the DOL or the IRS as well. I mean, it could be, to me, it's just not worth it to save a little bit of matching taxes. And I think it's a wives' tale that it's easier to bring someone as an independent contractor than to bring them on as an employee. Yeah.
I mean, it's 2 pieces of paper, and now they're your employee. Now, if they're pushing back and saying, I won't work for you unless you make me an independent contractor, then you go through your analysis with your expert, and then you make your decision, which should be, well, then you won't be working here.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I guess we can end with this, because I think that is what a lot of folks deal with in this industry and others, is that it's not so much the employer wants to treat them as an independent contractor. The employee wants to be an independent contractor because they can then control their money, things like that.
They can write things off.
How should employers handle that when they're dealing with somebody who, right, wrong, or indifferent is really pushing back on that? And it's not an easy call. And you're right, the liability is going to be ultimately on the employer when this all goes down, at least to an extent.
Yeah. I think that you have to, like everything that you do, I mean, everything, not just treatment, but how you treat your employees, every decision you make, you have to set some standard. Right. And for the most part, it's easy for you and I to say, if it involves a government body and they're telling you to do something, they're actually helping you. They're telegraphing to you. This is the standard. It's not mushy. And so that's what the DOL just did. They said, we've been looking at this. Our hand has been forced a little bit. We're trying to right this ship. And let me give you something that's not mushy. If they do the work that your business does, they're your worker employee, not your worker independent contractor.
Yeah.
And so, for me, I hate following the rules. Alex, I'm just going to tell everybody who's listening out there, there is a bit of irony here that I ended up being in HR and trying to help people and preach to people to please follow the rules to the best of your ability. But this is one of those where it's just so clear and so cut and dry. It's something that I think we all just have to adhere to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's something that folks have been kind of talking about for a while. I think this new clarification is going to bring in even more folks. I think it needs to be repeated. And you said it, the fact that they have bubbled that one clause to the surface means that they are paying attention to it. And that is what they are going to focus on. Yeah,
it is what they're going to focus on. And the states are 100% behind this. One of the things I want to just add this, and I guess we'll probably wrap this up. You're not thinking it this way, but at the state level, when you misclassify an employee, the state doesn't know their income because they're out there as an IC, and they're not able to collect things like child support. So they're not fooling around about this, because when they can't collect the child support, then that falls on the state to have to support that family. So there's a lot of seriousness attached to this, getting this right as employers.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I ended that on a high note, didn't I, Alex?
We're gonna have to do like an HR follow the rules hour.
That's gonna be great. We'll get 2 people in that. Yeah.
But no, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, and we deal with this with compliance and regulatory work.
Yeah, you do.
So it's it is what it is. There's you can't ignore it. And a lot of the times people kind of go blindly and not worry about it, but when you get caught, it matters and it becomes an issue. So
it's a pain in the rear end.
It's real. It really is. And so All right, Paul Edwards, CEDR HR Solutions. That is CEDR HR. And the website is cederhrsolutions.com. Is that what you
It's
said?
either one will get you there, CEDR,
Okay.
CEDRsolutions.com, and then put that / and type AmSpa behind it,
Right.
and you'll get to the landing page for your association, and
Yep.
it'll just put you right in and start getting some education. Grab
Yeah.
everything
No,
free you can
that's
get.
great. And you
Yep.
guys do a great job of educating and helping people out. So we
We love
appreciate
it.
all the good
We
work
love it.
that you do. Paul, I appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure.
Yep, mine too. Thanks, Alex.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for watching the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel for future videos and podcasts. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, please check our description below.